Understanding termination process. Factors to consider before terminating a contract. Presentation overview. Overview of termination process. The termination process is a critical step in human resources management that requires careful attention to legal requirements, communication, and other factors. In this presentation, we'll provide an overview of the process and its importance in the workplace. Factors to consider before termination. Before initiating the termination process, employers should consider a range of factors, including potential consequences for the employee and the organization, legal requirements, and communication strategies. Pre-termination, termination, and post-termination steps. The termination process involves several steps, including pre-termination preparation, termination meeting, and post-termination support. Understanding and following these steps is crucial to ensure a smooth and respectful transition for the employee and the organization. Introduction to termination process. Termination reasons. There are many reasons why termination may be necessary, including breach of contract, unsatisfactory performance, or mutual agreement. It is important to identify the reasons and follow legal and operational steps accordingly. Legal and operational steps. Termination involves legal and operational steps, including providing notice, preparing termination documents, and returning assets. These steps must be followed carefully to avoid legal or financial consequences. Termination overview. Termination process. Termination involves a formal process of ending a deal, partnership, or facility and requires specific legal and operational steps to be taken to ensure a smooth transition and minimize potential risks. Legal considerations. Termination often involves legal considerations such as breach of contract or violation of terms of agreement, which should be carefully reviewed and assessed before initiating termination. Operational considerations. Termination also involves operational considerations such as transitioning resources, assets, and personnel, which should be carefully planned and executed to avoid disruption or loss of productivity. Importance of termination process. Avoiding disputes. A well-planned termination process can help avoid disputes that may arise between parties involved. The process should clearly define the terms and conditions of the agreement, outline the steps to be taken in the event of termination, and ensure that all parties are aware of their rights and responsibilities. Minimizing risks. A well-planned termination process can minimize risks associated with termination, including financial, legal, and reputational risks. The process should clearly define the obligations of each party, provide for the return of any property or confidential information, and ensure that any outstanding payments or obligations are fulfilled. Protecting interests of parties. A well-planned termination process can protect the interests of all parties involved, including employees, customers, and suppliers. The process should be fair and transparent, provide for adequate notice and severance pay where applicable, and ensure that any intellectual property or trade secrets are protected. Factors to consider before initiating termination. Consequences of termination. It is important to consider the potential consequences of termination, including the financial and reputational risks to both the company and the terminated employee. Legal considerations. Before initiating termination, it is important to consider the contractual obligations and regulatory requirements that may impact the process. Potential consequences, financial impacts. Termination can lead to financial hardships for employees, including loss of income, loss of benefits, and potential debt. Employers may also incur costs associated with severance pay and unemployment benefits. Reputational risk. Termination can harm an employee's reputation and impact the reputation of the employer. Negative publicity can damage the company's brand and make it harder to attract and retain employees and customers. Legal implications. Termination can lead to legal action, including wrongful termination suits, discrimination claims, and breach of contract allegations. Employers may incur legal fees, settlements, and damage awards. Legal considerations, contractual obligations. Termination of a contract involves a number of legal considerations related to contractual obligations, such as terms of termination, notice periods, and damage for breach of contract. Regulatory requirements. Termination of a contract may involve regulatory requirements, such as compliance with data protection regulations or licensing requirements. Dispute resolution mechanisms. Termination of a contract may result in dispute which can be resolved through various mechanisms such as arbitration, mediation, or litigation. The process of termination, pre-termination steps. Before terminating an agreement or contract, it is important to notify all parties involved and prepare for the transition. This includes identifying key stakeholders, assessing the impact of the termination, and developing a detailed transition plan. Termination steps. Termination steps include the termination agreement, assets transfer, and termination of contracts. It is important to ensure that all parties involved understand their obligations and responsibilities during the termination process. Post-termination steps. After the termination process is complete, it is important to communicate the results to all stakeholders and monitor the progress of the transition. This includes conducting post-termination reviews and addressing any issues that arise. Pre-termination steps. Notify all parties involved. Before initiating termination, all parties involved must be notified. This includes employees, clients, and other stakeholders who may be affected by the termination. Prepare for asset transfer. Asset transfer is an important consideration when terminating a business relationship. Pre-termination steps must be taken to ensure a smooth asset transfer process. Develop communication plan. Developing a communication plan is essential to minimize potential negative effects of the termination. The plan should include communication with employees, clients, and other stakeholders. Termination steps. Negotiating termination agreements. Negotiating a termination agreement is an important step in ending a business relationship. It involves discussing and agreeing on the terms of the termination, such as the payment of any outstanding debt or the transfer of assets. Transferring assets. Transferring assets involves transferring ownership of any physical or intellectual property that is being terminated. These may include transferring domain names, intellectual property rights, or physical assets such as computers or office equipment. Terminating contracts. Terminating contracts is the final step in the termination process. This involves ensuring that all contractual obligations have been fulfilled and that all parties have been notified of the termination. Post-termination steps. Communication. Effective communication is a crucial step after termination. It is important to communicate the reason for the termination to the remaining staff and ensure that they have all the information they need to make a smooth transition. Monitoring. Monitoring the progress of the transition is important to identify and resolve any issues that may arise. This can be done by setting up regular check-ins and providing support to the remaining staff as needed. Evaluation. Evaluation of the termination process is important to identify areas for improvement and ensure that similar issues do not arise in the future. This can be done by conducting exit interviews with the terminated employee and gathering feedback from the remaining staff. Conclusion. Having a well-planned termination process in place is crucial to ensure a smooth and effective termination of a contract. Key factors that should be considered before initiating termination include legal obligations, contractual obligations, and communication with stakeholders. The steps involved in the termination process include planning, execution, and post-termination activities. Thank you.